Bella, what do you see as what qualities of the eternal child do you see that are kind of the central essence of this energy that we're moving through?
I would say to not be afraid to break down something that we built. So the sandcastle, for example, or the card house, or how when you're children, when you're a child, you on your bed, maybe you put blankets and you like make a house there, but then you need to sleep in it. So then you have to take it down. And for me, that's the eternal child. I innovate, but not all the things are going to be long lasting. There are some things that are, but in the meantime, I'm also playing and doing it again. And I'm not afraid of taking down what I just put up.
Yeah, there's an interesting play on this within the world of psychology, where for quite a long time now, I think we've identified the existence of an inner child. And I wanted to bring that up just to draw a little bit of a bit of a contrast between this idea that you just shared, Bella, about the freedom to play through creation and destruction, versus what appears to me to be a perspective of kind of like a restorative interaction with an identity that we have inside that was never allowed to fully evolve along with us as we grew and changed. They're almost, strangely enough, the inner child is almost an opposite expression of the eternal child, because that inner child is a crystallization, a stopping of the mutations and the changings that occur where it becomes stuck inside us. Not that the eternal child doesn't exist within it still, because it does, but the feeling that we have an aspect of ourself that is hidden inside is kind of surrounded by this idea of going in and reintegrating an aspect that never changed after a certain point. And this quality of building sandcastles and kicking them down with total glee and just kind of playing with that absolute freedom is the expression of changing consistently, always embracing change. So I think that's kind of an interesting difference in terms of how we look at these qualities. Kelly asked if we would relate this energy to the teachings of non-attachment.
Yeah, why not? And at the same time, there is something here I would say that is a little bit more energetic, because we have the thunder element energy, and then we have the water energy. And I would say non-attachment somehow is this inner calm where nothing really in a way matters. There's a lot of mindfulness in it. When we look at water and thunder, it's not very calm actually. So in a way, the third gene key or this archetype is ready for the difficulty at the beginning. If we would just go to the I Ching, there is something that you're going towards, and there is something where you have the energy. So that's the thunder energy. And then at the same time, we could say it's the depths of the water. So here we know that it's not just going to be Buddha that can sit in mindfulness. It's going to be something that it's going towards and that it's working with. That I think that could be a distinction to make.
Yeah, and it strikes me that similarly to that idea of the inner child, we have this perception of teachings of non-attachment as meaning that we are in a constant state of peacefulness. And I think when non-attachment is fully embraced, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, we feel things even more intensely than we did before. It's just that our ego structure no longer attempts to control those events that create those emotional experiences. And I think this is a wonderful question because it gets right to the heart of what's going on within the shadow of this particular archetype, and how we end up experiencing an inner child is that either need to control, or the sort of, every time I read about the reactive nature of this one, I think about people who believe in anarchy as the antidote to the kind of monochrome, homogeneous life that we can witness across society, and sort of all of the oppressive aspects of it, you know, that reactive quality. That's also a form of being filled with attachment, you know, being attached to a concept of freedom rather than the practice of embracing with freedom the reality that exists around us. And you know, Bella, you mentioned the hexagram, water over thunder, and we've been moving through the thunder bases for a little while now. I think we've done fire, air, and one other one over thunder besides. Now we're in water over thunder. And when I think about, you know, in this gene key, Richard Red talks about the evolution of the singular cell. And if the premise of science that each of us is a selfish being interested in survival at the, you know, as the most dominant function of our programming, you know, as an aspect of life, then life never would have evolved from a single cell to multicellular experience, because each cell would have tried to survive at the expense of others. And when we look at the idea of non-attachment, what we're really talking about is the function of our ego, which is brain-centered, right, currently, and the separation that is created through our experience in the form that we take to attempt to control the environment so that we can experience safety or harmony or whatever number of biological drives we have going on within us. And the idea of this gene key as an evolutionary function, it's almost mind-blowing for me to consider this, but the idea of moving the brain, or the center of our identity or our thinking or the awareness from our brain center down to our solar plexus, our feeling center, it entails that our ego becomes a unity form of ego rather than an individualized and separate one. And there's nothing more similar to that than the idea of enlightenment as it's taught alongside of these concepts of non-attachment, of, though it often took the form of destruction of the ego, when enlightenment dawns upon a being, they no longer see themselves as self and other. They see themselves as self with themselves. really, really, really interesting quality. Bella, how do you see, or maybe I should just first ask, supposedly we're in 2022, sometime in 2027, there's going to be some gene key 55 breakthroughs being born on the planet. What could possibly happen in the next 5 years that would transform our individual egos from being unicellular in a sense to becoming multicellular? Meaning, when we think about our bodies, the trillions of cells in our bodies, not a single one operates with the idea of individual free will as we relate to it. They all work with us, in some way, shape, or form. So I'm imagining our own individual egos doing the same thing. What could possibly change that will that to be supported between now and 2027?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen, but I feel like we are going to be more and more pressurized, like kind of even a diamond, in order to develop, it's going to need pressure. So part of what I feel is already happening is that we are understanding how much we are connected, and just what happened the last few years when there was this one thing that affected almost everybody in the whole world, and we had those rules and restrictions that were everywhere. So I think we are realizing more and more that we're all connected, and that free will is a big theme. And I go back to what Kelly brought forward, because I feel like she asked us to look at this third gene key, or this archetype eternal child, and what is the qualities here. And we have seen that it's the thunder and the water. So the thunder has a lot of energy, and it's a spark, and it's a kind of initiator. That's what we know. When we have thunder over thunder, we have the initiator archetype, or we don't call it initiator, we call it thunder. Yeah, we call it thunder, but that's the energy of it. It's something that starts and sparks. And then the water, when we have water over water, we have this deep devotion, even if you have to go into the abyss. So it's this deep, deep work. So that's the qualities that we already spoke about. And then I'm thinking in an astrological sense, we do have Aries. So that is more of that ego that says me, and I have to exist and survive as a self on this planet. And I have fire. It's a fire element, so I can burn everything so that I can exist. And somehow I would say, because it's on the cusp between Aries and Taurus has very much to do with this earth and the understanding of how we survive and the simple basic things. So somehow we are on the cusp between the first line reality, where we have lived in, and you're speaking about the sixth line reality we're going into in 2027. So we are in the cusp, and maybe there has been a lot of selfishness and ego and single cell way of functioning. And I think with the North Node in Taurus, and we speaking about this in this specific archetype, that it's going to be coming back to basics, coming back to simplicity, coming back to how we nurture and how we are connected, and how not only to each other, but also to Mother Earth. And when we start to respect her, I feel like we're also going to start to respect each other, because it's kind of with the mother that everything starts. So when we start to respect Mother Earth again, it feels even that kind of the 2000 years at least with the patriarchy and God being a man, in a way, we're coming back to something that's possibly more balanced, where we are having Mother Earth and Father Sky, and they work together. And
yeah, it's so interesting to consider around this Christian holiday of Easter, that in the Aramaic language, which is supposedly the language of Jesus, the word for God was actually included mother and father within it as one. So, you know, I think for quite a while now, a lot of people have been becoming more and more and more and more aware of how feminine energy is kind of having this restoration in terms of our experience of relating with each other and to the environment that we exist in. And I think what's really significant about considering this shift is how the way that our energy bodies are built. We have our physical body, which from our perspective, we don't really see as an energy body, but of course it's an energy body. We eat food to have energy. So it's simply a dense form that our perceptive capabilities can see. The other subtle bodies, the energetic bodies that move out and beyond our physical body, the boundaries of those bodies is much less defined than our physical bodies. You know, when we look at quantum physics, it kind of supposes that if we were in the proper state, we could move our physical body through any other solid structure as a potential, you know, like the ability to walk through walls, for instance. What we often don't realize or sense is that our emotional body is constantly doing exactly that. Our emotional bodies are always intermingling with the other people that are in an important relationship with us in our lives, as well as the people that are just physically nearby us. And even to some extent, the influence of the collective energy of that human aura that exists surrounding the entire planet. So these subtle bodies are always intermingling, and if our awareness was centered more within those areas, we would have more of a sense of what's happening in the other, and which would, you know, naturally cause our experience of the other to shift to a point where we would no longer witness it as other. And I think looking at what you're suggesting, Bella, is this sort of awareness of the planet or of Mother Earth as this living organism. The more that we feel that, rather than thinking of it as a mental construct that we believe in and makes us spiritual, you know, but when we can feel the feelings of a tree or feel the feelings of the plant life or of the soil, the more we can have that experience. And I think we're seeing this happening in society in interesting ways. I mean, if you look at some of the vegetarian, vegan movements that have been going on around the world, at the base of those ideas and movements is that experience of feeling the feelings of the other. And, you know, I think it's happening. It's just we're unable to really see where it's all headed and at any point in time. And I think our egos get often really wrapped up in the rightness or the wrongness of our experiences and the importance of overcoming our experience of dominance by with some show of strength, It's like we're all kind of we're going through these changes under the shadow of domination, and it's kind of kind of holding us back from having our awareness expand a little bit more.
Yeah, when I hear you speak, I go back to the geometry of the wheel, and I'm feeling into where we are right now, and I'm seeing as well Kelly in the chat is writing, and I'm seeing where we are. So where we are, we said we are on the cusp between Aries and Taurus. These are the two first signs, and we are just in the beginning of the astrological year, and that's very individual. It's who am I in the world, who is the self, and how do I survive in one way. And then when we look at the polarity point on the other side, the 50, it's going to be on that cusp between Libra, which is the opposite of Aries, and then Scorpio, which is the opposite of Taurus. And that's also where we have the much more transpersonal Libra, the balancing with the other, and Scorpio, that is also even more, it's like death. If Taurus is survival, Scorpio is more like what needs to die, and also it's water, so it's like what needs to die on an emotional level, and Taurus is more like what do we need on a physical level, on an earth level, earth element level, in order to survive. So there is something here where I would say where we are in the 3, this is the eternal child. It's not yet mature to actually really, maybe it's so beautifully innocent so it can feel the oneness of all. And at the same time, it is here because we're here to have an individuated experience of this realm. So it is here to actually use that thunder energy and also dare to jump and say, I'm going to go for this experience fully. And it's through those jumps and through that thunder that it actually is going to mature around life, and then it goes around the circle, and it's going to have all the different parts, the personal, the transpersonal, and then even beyond that in the wheel. And somehow, even when I read what Kelly is saying about forgiveness and the relationship with the mother, the own mother, or the bigger mother, it feels like somehow where we are on the cusp between Aries and Taurus, that it is your own inner stability that is important. Like, how do you use your fire in Aries? And here we can take Mars, which is the ruler of Aries, and we can say, this is Richard Rudd with the core wound. When you have the energy of this warrior planet, are you creating havoc in the world? Are you making wars that don't lead anywhere? Like, look at the world right now. Like, what are the wars that we have? Are they leading to something good? Like, one man gets a bigger piece of land. Like, that is the low frequency of Mars and Aries. So how are you using your fire in order to build the world, build the self, have those challenges that are worth it, and those maybe confrontations that are worth it and are going to build the self. And then in Taurus, it's you and your stability. So it feels like almost the answer to that question, what's your relationship to the other, where we are in the wheel now, is your relationship to yourself and your own strength. Taurus is also really determined. So how are you using your determination, slash stubbornness? Are you using it for good in order to build? Because that's what Taurus wants to do. It wants to build, it wants to create stability. So for me, it is about building the self here, so that on the other side of the wheel, in Libra and in Scorpio, we can have a more healthy relationship to the other. And maybe right here, in the sense in the astrological sense of the wheel, it can even be a little bit hard to include the other. It's almost saying, like, know yourself so that you can go beyond that. But you always start there. It's what I get from the archetype right now as I'm tuning in. And forgive yourself too for when you made war that weren't constructive. Forgive yourself when you weren't able to create stability for yourself through Taurus. That's for me the first step before you think you can go and do it with something outside yourself.
Yeah, Paula chimed in with the chaos that leads to a new order or a breakthrough. And Bella, while you were speaking, what was kind of coming up for me was this concept of the eternal child is such that no matter our age, we are all children of the cosmos, as it's described in the gene keys, even in the I Ching. You know, the idea of being a part of the cosmos rather than separated from it. And when you look at this idea of forgiveness and asking, well, how can we play with forgiveness? This is like, from a gene keys perspective, this is like, how do the cities of gene key 3 and gene key 4 get along? And when you look at the way that the cities kind of interpenetrate each other, there is no separation between any of them. So when we look at this question from the perspective of the gene keys, how can we play with forgiveness? We can get a little bit lost in attuning our current state, which is perhaps a state of intolerance, with the acidic state of the eternal child, which is innocence, which entails constant and never-ending play. You know, it's called all play and no work. And so in order to play with this, the state of our current situation, we need to look at the energy where we currently experience our reality through. What is throughout this gene key 3, one of the things that is emphasized is that it's not us and our choices that move the evolution forward. It's the frequency of the life moving through the mechanism that we are. This gene key really brings into a focus the importance of the human design system as a model for the function of a human being. And so when we look at what is determining our experience, it's the frequency of the life that is moving through us. So if we are experiencing intolerance, then the frequency of the energy that is moving through us to generate our perceptions is by nature a lower frequency that includes fear. And when we can remember our innate experiences of the eternal child, who is able to essentially play without intolerance. Anytime the child plays, there isn't necessarily intolerance, although I'm sure when we all think back to the playground, we can remember just endless examples of intolerance that happen on the playground. But the feeling, that inner drive that causes us to desire to play, the feeling of joy that happens when we engage in the play, that one doesn't really contain any intolerance. It accepts the whole experience and is ready to mutate with the experience. So that idea of flexibility, you know, of kind of approaching this idea of moving from a state of intolerance into forgiveness, it's like, can we engage with it in an innovative way? How can I look at this differently than I've looked at it before? And what could I do that I haven't chosen before that might bring me some delight? You know, and I think it's interesting. This question is like, I'm starting to get these like, okay, there's other gene keys involved in here, you know, and in your own, if you're facing this question in some form, how do I bring the eternal child into these various situations? As you study the various gene keys, if you follow with us through Lunar Alchemy and learn about each of the gene keys, or you're exploring them through the 64 doors, or even if you're just contemplating the gene keys on your own, eventually these gene keys will start to weave into your contemplation of a situation and kind of give you those little, ooh, I should go over here and try this, as they weave together.
Yeah, and there is something when you were mentioning the shadow frequencies here, and I don't know if I totally resonate with the words that Richard has chosen. I can see that. I can also just really much see, that's a weird way of saying it. People that have the 3, they can have a very chaotic life, and you can, or situation, and you look at it from the outside, and from the outside, it seems like it's completely unnecessary. Like if they just would have planned a little bit better, if they just, it was completely unnecessary to create that chaos. But in the shadow frequency, that is the only thing that can be created. So I absolutely, what you're saying, Paul, as well. Of course, a chaos can be very creative, but when it is in the shadow frequency, it is those seemingly stupid situations where it would be so easy to avoid it. And I guess there is a kind of immaturity. It's a kind of eternal child that never learns from the mistakes in a way. And funny as well, because it's the 3rd gene key, it seems like it has a little bit to do with the 3rd line of the hexagram, where there's the fire that just like, it always kind of stumbles and burns up. And it looks like the martyr from the outside. And it's easy for that person to be shamed, because you can be like, don't you ever learn? You know that this is what happens every single time. But that's what it is. That is what it is at the shadow frequency. I've also seen a lot of either extreme organizing, thinking that you can organize, and that is probably the repressive, think that you can organize, and then you don't dare with the creativity. And then the kind of over creativity that is almost dangerous, where it's so creative so that, you know, I don't even know, like you you think that you can like move a whole house on a like trailer without anything protection, and then, you know, a sofa or something flies off and kill the person like behind. Like there is something where it's just it looks like stupidity, but there could also be in that, of course, some kind of innovation. And when we organize something, you could also see something that you couldn't see if you didn't have that energy to organize it. But that's how I experience the shadow frequencies when I think about this gene key. And I wonder, because here we are actually speaking about chaos as a shadow frequency. We are, you know, that's what Richard chose for the lower frequency. Chaos can also be this super fertile ground, but here it is chosen for that low frequency.
Yeah, I was kind of struck by how challenging it is for our minds to consider the idea of chaos as an aspect of the perfection of the order of everything. And, you know, it's like when we can begin to look at aspects of chaos in our life, or disorder, or the impulse to control, and recognize that there's something underlying that our perception of chaos that could go deeper into our inner nature that we may not have allowed ourselves to fully feel. You know, if this third gene key is one of the keys of the transformation from a brain-centered ego to an emotional-centered ego, where the ego no longer functions based on dog eat dog, every man for himself, that type of logic, into a feeling one, then humans as a species have to feel the feelings that are underneath the perceptions that we have. So when I think about the third gene key, the third lines that we may have in our charts or in our profiles, you know, that willingness to experience, to feel those emotions, to embrace what's happening within, all the way to the core, is really, really important. And when you think about the eternal child, I mean, until a child has been conditioned to no longer feel their feelings, to suppress them or to react to them in some form, which for many of us, unfortunately, happened at extraordinarily young ages. But, you know, perhaps you need to go back to age 3 or age 2, when a child feels a feeling and you can see the energy like literally moving through them as they cry or they laugh or whatever it is. You know, that freedom of movement of that energy is what the eternal child is all about. So, you know, when I think about
one, or sorry, go on first.
I was just going to say that's the thing that really gets to this gene key for me, is like how able are we to like feel the entirety of an experience.
Yeah, I would like to just mention before we wrap up the 60 and the 3, because they are working together, those two archetypes in the body graph between the root and the sacral. And often when we have a process, because wherever we have a channel, we have a theme, a process, and together they are creating something that's more than the archetypes by themselves. And often whatever comes from the sacral is the one that decides if there's energy to what's on the other side. It's that, yeah, it's where the energy lives. And when we look at the 3 and the 6, it's almost reversed, because in the root center, we have also fuel or energy, and there's a pulse. So that the third archetype can play and come up with a lot of things. And it's only when the pulse is right and the 60 kind of opens up that limitation or rigidity that actually together they can create something that can last, like a new structure that can actually have that that long-lasting energy from both of them. So in some way, here we have a gate with a lot of energy. We know it's thunder and water. There's ready to go and have the difficult in the beginning. It's ready for it. And in a way, it's one of the few sacral gates that need the other side for that pulse that comes from the root and says, okay, now we can break this structure and go beyond it. And we have everything we need in order to create a new structure. So I would say, when you have the 3 or the 60 or not, like not the whole channel there, I would say also there is this potential for depression if we look at the shadow frequency, or discomfort, because that, you, whether it's the 3 or the 60, or even if you have both, like which one is more alive, which one do you feel most? And here these are powerful energies. So I would say also they are possibly physical energy that you're feeling. And I agree with, of course, it's the victim state of the chaotic mind. And like I said before, I also see it in space. I see it when they, like I say, like they build things, or they are like moving things. It's very much in space. Ashley has a 3 in her pearl, I think. And she loves to do everything. Like she prints everything and she cuts it in pieces. And she does a lot of things in space. The third archetype need that. It's the child. Like a child is going to have to taste and hold, and you know, also in the cusp between Aries and Taurus, you need all the senses of Taurus, and you need that kind of more tangible play in a way that Aries has. Yeah, so physical, energetic, sometimes frustrating, And when it breaks through, what Paula was saying too, when it breaks through, it's something that is like changing the whole, changing for all of humanity. It's changing the whole energy circulation of the body graph of the body. But if we, like you were saying, if the body graph, we can think that in one person, we could possibly also think of the body graph as humanity. And if you go and look at the tree of life, for example, you see that it is humanity. It's a model of consciousness with those different spheres that are there.
Mm-hmm.
So then how important is this 360 for the rest of the tree? It is that it's the beginning of the Kundalini, of the life force that happens between these two centers.
Mm. Yeah, so 60 and its gift of realism, you know, paired with innovation, that's like, and I don't know why, maybe it's because of the way that I relate to the words that are used, but I always get this feeling that even the gift frequency has this sort of elevated mystical quality about it that goes beyond our common everyday usage of the word. The word innovation is used all throughout business today. And it's like, you know, you need to innovate in your job or in your company or whatever it is. And it's like, are these really innovations? Not really. These are things that are like, they're creative, yes. But is it paradigm shift? Not really. But that quality of the child, you know, like when that true innovation occurs, it's an expression of something that is so unique, it's never been seen before in the world. And because of that, it has the potential to completely change the way that we operate, the way that we experience things. So, you know, mixing that up with a huge dose of realism, man, it's just like, it's really incredible what the potential is. Well, we had better move on to our transmission portion. Thank you to those of you joining us for the discussion portion. If you'd like to join us in the Lunar Alchemy elemental transmissions, you can explore the membership through the Unlock Your Design web academy. And in there we have the Lunar Alchemy pages. You can also explore individual sessions there if there's a particular gene key that you would like. And
I have something to say too, because if you join like this, we are realizing that the whole dynamic is changing when people are inside. So I would also say, if you come back, I invite you the same way as Kelly did and you did a little bit, Paula, to actually interact with us. Because if you're here, it's for a reason. So in the chat, when we are few like today, but also the Q&A, if there's something that, you know, you have something that's already burning around that archetype, you know, I feel for me, that can actually, the same way with today, with this question about forgiveness and the mother, I feel like that opened up for new things in the discussion and where this archetype is in the wheel. So for me, the fact that we're inside is creating the opportunity for co-creation with those of you that are here, and use that possibility to play with us, because otherwise it's no point. We could be on Facebook still. So that's just my invitation, how I feel about the intimacy that we can have now that we're here together.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we look at that question, Kelly, that you asked, and in relationship to forgiveness, that really put into perspective the eternal child and the inner child, because that's the question from which humanity is living right now. And yes, we get glimpses of that eternal child as our frequency raises and gets higher. And we must have more and more of that experience of raising that frequency, of having that forgiveness with ourselves, our mothers, and each other, to allow our potential to really be truly explored. So for those of you joining us for the discussion portion, thanks for joining us. We would love to see you in a future discussion and welcome your comments. We'll be here on Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern and would love to see you there. For our members, we will launch the other container for our transmission. We'll be doing a water body transmission, the element of water for this one, because of it is water over thunder. And when we look at this movement of the ego from a mental brain-based ego to a feeling-based ego, the feelings are most directly connected to the element of water in our bodies. And when we really look at that, we begin to recognize that this process of crystallizing of non-movement, of non-mutation that happens within us, within our psyches, within our bodies, this is really what prevents our potential from being fully expressed. And for that reason, the memory of the water that exists in our body, those hard-wired memories that we have, is really can be a way in which we don't experience that inner nature of the eternal child. So we'll be doing that in the next container. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. So we'll see you in a couple of just a minute.